Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to The Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. With soaring nitrogen prices, farmers are looking at cheaper alternatives inside the farm gate. Dairy farmer Jim White and grassland researcher Mike Egan join us to explain how to establish white clover on the grazing platform. And I first asked Jim about his experience of over-sowing white clover last spring.
Last year was our first year doing over-sowing of clover, and look, we made the decision to get going at this. And I think that's the first thing, you don't make up your mind the day you're going to go about it. There must be a plan in place and research of what are the right protocol to follow. So I think being prepared in advance is key. And then, get your fertility status at the fields, and the fields you're going to pick is the next thing then. So we had a block that was really suitable for clover. It had been reseeded 2 years previously. All the weeds were sorted in it. We knew the fertility status. And so everything was planned the year before. And got this time last year, it was COVID and everything. So, getting the seed, and Mike wasn't able to call maybe before it. And so there was a little bit of a challenge there, but we might have been slightly late putting it in, but I think we got back well in the game after that. So yeah, I think the plan beforehand is the key, Emma-Louise.
And in terms of the method you use, Jim?
Yes, okay. Look, there's various options there. And while I would say it's important the method you choose, and that you're asking me that, so we use the moor drill, but I couldn't emphasize enough the preparation beforehand in picking the field and having all your information at hand, and the management afterwards. They're the two big items. We used the moor drill, and that worked well for us. The contractor came in and done it for us. Yeah. We used Chieftain and Buddy at 2 kilos, at a seeding rate of 2 kilos.
And you mentioned that you might have been slightly late going in last year. What date did you go in at? And I guess if you had it back again, ideally, how much earlier would you have went?
Look, as I said, last April, we were, everything was delayed. I think I had to go down to Moore Park, get the seed and everything, it was... COVID kind of tricked it a little bit, and then the weather, I think, whatever, but it was into May. I think it was the 8th of May or the 10th of May. And look, it was slightly dry, but there was a learning process in it that, we were slightly late going, I think, but with strong management afterwards and having everything right beforehand, we got the result that we wanted. But I suppose a lesson from last year would be that April is preferably, and we're going with April this year. But I still think, if you're, I suppose what I'm trying to say, Emma-Louise, is if you have all your protocols right in place, it will work out. That's what we found. And
post-sow management, Jim, what were the key things that you implemented after you over-sowed with clover to make it work?
Okay, so we sowed, our field was floored, and I mean now less than what a mower do. It was, and it was open because it was a reseed and there wasn't weeds in it. So it was slightly dry, I would say, slightly dry. But everything else was perfect, if you follow me. Okay, so we conditions were good, and we sowed, and then we followed on. We came back in. We went in with 2 to 2,500 gallons of watery slurry done with splash plate, because we felt that was the best way of doing it, and that added a bit of moisture to it. And we came back in then and grazed it at about 1,000, 1,100. It was in a block together, and we just took out that block. I think it was maybe 3 weeks later. There was a cover on it, and we didn't go too heavy with fertiliser. We gave it so much, we didn't cut back to nothing for the first year. But the key thing was we hammered it, I suppose you would say, at every occasion on grazing would be our grazing management for the year ahead.
And to you, Mike, we hear from Jim that it was into May when he over-sowed in 2021, and he intends on going in April this year. What is the window that would be recommended for farmers to go with over-sowing?
Look, there's probably a 2-month window in terms of when the best time to get clover established on farms by over-sowing, and that's probably April and May. And I know the weather has been very good the last couple of weeks, and some farmers were tempted to go, but the risk is, like we're getting this week, ground frost. So you want to leave it late enough in the spring that you kind of reduce the risk of getting ground frost, and that is greatly reduced in early April. But you also want to do it early enough that you can get adequate moisture. So there's kind of a 2-month window, April and May, and I would say drier farms like Jim's, more sandier, low clear content soils, probably are better off doing it in April rather than into kind of middle or late May, because of the soil moisture deficit issue that you can reach. So the one thing that clover needs, or 3 things that clover needs when you're establishing it, and definitely when you're over-sowing it, is nutrients, and that's your soil fertility and your fertiliser. Moisture, that's timing, crucially down to timing. And if you're going to, and it needs 6 weeks moisture from date of sowing to once it's kind of been okay. So if you're going to typically get very dry in end of May, you really need to be sowing early to middle of April. Or if you're on a heavier farm that doesn't burn out until June or July, you can probably get away with sowing it into middle or late May. So it's kind of a 2-month window, but it depends on soil types within that 2-month window to do it. So I would say kind of the earlier the better, without running into risks of ground frost as well.
Jim mentioned he used the moor drill to establish the clover. Can you talk and highlight the main methods that farmers are using in order to establish clover through over-sowing?
Yeah, look, there's various different methods that you can use for over-sowing. And look, as part of the on-farm study, that Jim is one of our farmers that we have on the on-farm study, but there are various different methods that we have used and will continue to use in going forward. And the most common question I get asked is, what's the best method, or what machine can I use, or can I use this machine, or can I use that machine? Machines are probably are very important in terms of getting it out, but they're probably not the main critical factor in getting established. But having said that, you need to ensure that whatever machine you're using, you do need to get it right. So there's probably 3 different types of machines, and then broadcasting as well on top of that. So broadcasting, you're going with a fertiliser spreader or a slug pellet applicator or a quad spinner, and you're going immediately after grazing. Typically, if you're going with a fertiliser spreader, clover seed is very, very small. So the first thing I would say is you want to do a small area at a time, and not travel great distances with it. So you're more so putting it mixing it in the fertiliser spreader in the field, with some sort of compound fertiliser, 0730 or even Gran Lime, to help the clover seed travel. The second thing then is, if you are going doing it with a broadcasting, there's most of the new fertilizer spreaders are throwing a 12-24 meter tram line, which clover seed is very, very small and it won't travel that. So the older fertilizer spreaders or the quad applicators are probably a better job for that. But the key thing is making sure that seed gets to touch the soil, and not doing it on a very windy day. Second, there's types of machines. Then you can have a tine harrow type machine, like an Einbach or a Rakeman. Then you have a Guttler type machine, or you have a Moore drill or a Uni drill or Atkinson drill like Jim used. Again, all of pros and cons. Atkinson drill or the Moore Uni drill, it cuts a slit into the ground, and buries the seed, which you're guaranteed soil seed contact, but the risk is burying the seed too deep. So the setting needs to be correct on that, so the seed isn't buried too deep and it won't be able to push up through the ground. Then you have your Guttler kind of machine, that's kind of a hard tine harrow setting. On the back of it has a Cambridge roller, a hard tine harrow set on the front, and then a Cambridge roller on the back after the seed. Again, very, very good, but can be quite severe on the grass if the settings aren't right, again, in terms of adjusting the tine harrows on the front. And then you have your tine harrow ones like your Wakeman or your Einbach. Very simple to use. No roller on the back of it, has a set of tines, and then broadcast the seed onto the ground. They are the different types of machines that you can use, but again, I would be more concerned with picking the right paddocks, and the management afterwards is probably a better target of your main focus rather than the machine to use.
And then, Mike, in terms of the variety, referring back to Jim again, he's using Buddy and Chieftain. But I mean, let's break it up. We have small, medium, and large leaf white clovers. What should dairy farmers be using for grazing ground?
Yeah, look, realistically, I think all grazing farmers should keep away from larger leaf cultivars, your Aravoca or Flower Blanca, Alice, those kind of ones. Medium leaf cultivars are very well suited for dairy farming systems and cattle grazing systems in general. So your Chieftains, your Eberhurls, your Buddies, your Ionas, Crusader, are all very, very good ones. And there's a new one on the list as well. I think it's Aberswan this year. So they're probably the medium leaves. Smaller leaf cultivars are more suited to sheep grazing systems, but even within the small leaf cultivars, there's probably two cultivars there now that they're the biggest of the small. Cool Finn has been there for a number of years, and a new one came out on the market this year. I'm not 100% sure of the name of it, but again, I would probably stick to your more medium leaf cultivars and probably the largest of the small cultivars.
And finally then, Mike, Jim has a recommendation that, you're targeting to get into swards at 1,000, 1,100, in terms of post-sow management. I suppose, what is the rationale for that? And have you any further tips for farmers in terms of management post-sow?
The reason we want to go for those light pre-grazing covers for the first 3 to 4 grazing rotations is that seed has to germinate and persist and established against a rapidly growing ryegrass plant that could be growing 60, 70 or plus a day. So by keeping pre-grazing covers low, I would say the first grazing should be at 800 of a cover, and the following 3 grazings then at 1,000 or 1,100 of a cover, give or take 50. And again, that's just let light down to the base of the sward. If it doesn't get light down to the base of the sward, that seedling is not going to be able to develop a strong enough root structure because there's no light getting down into it. And then 6 months after sowing, the plant structure won't be there in the ground to help that plant persist then coming into the winter months. And that is low pre-grazing covers, tight grazing residuals, and grazing it later on in the final rotation in autumn and winter. So it has a low cover in it over the winter period.
But Mike, isn't it for dairy farmers, there's so much going on. Come mid-May, right? We for as long as we can remember, we all know for an absolute fact, whatever way growth is, grass is going to head out the 15th of May, 19th of May. So for a dairy farmer, it's the challenge, I think, with the clover is the management of clover is coming at a very critical, busy time on dairy farms. You're trying to manage what fields for silage, what not for silage. You're in the middle of AI breeding. You're trying to keep the grass covers right. And then you have the other block of clover that has to be probably walked every 4 or 5 days. You can't go away from it because it could go from 500 today to 1,000 in 3-4 days because you're dealing with high fertility paddocks, probably reseeded maybe only 2-3 years ago. So, it's not, we can say it easy on a record here today.
Oh, completely, yeah.
It's not simple, Mike, isn't that?
No, it's not simple. And I think one of the key things with when you're picking your paddocks as well, and look, we did it on your farm last year, Jim, and we're doing it on most of the farms as well. There's no point in picking, if you're doing 5 or 6 paddocks or even 2 or 3 paddocks on your farm, having them opposite ends of the farm. Because it's going to be too hard to manage them and preferably to manage them, particularly if they've been sown in within a couple of days of each other. So doing a cluster of paddocks that's close proximity to each other, they're easier managed together. And by doing a small enough area, because there's so much going on farms at that time of the year, there's no point in doing a very big area of your farm, particularly on over-sowing, because it needs such preferential management for the first couple of months after sowing. So doing a small enough area, I would say 15, max 20% of your grazing area, in one go, or in 1 year, sorry, and then try and keep those paddocks as close as possible together so it's easier to manage them. And realistically, it is not going to work every time, and there is a higher rate of failure with over-sowing. I think being able to accept that it's not everything is going to work perfectly, but giving it the best chance possible and getting those things right when you have an awful lot else going on in the farm, and that's just trying to keep everything as simple as possible.
And to you, Jim, if we think about the management that Michael has spoken about, essentially in the main grazing season, you're targeting a cover of 1,500, and you're essentially short-circuiting your rotation where you are going into these paddocks that have new clover established at 1,000, 1,100. So, I mean, to you, what are the key drivers of success in the paddocks that you've oversown last year, with particular emphasis on your management?
I suppose, as you were asking that question, there's only one thing coming to my mind, and that's having been on pasture base and walking the farm every 5 days and following the numbers, following the covers that you have, and following the plan that's on your. So without knowing your cover, without knowing your rotation and your plan, your planner on the pasture base, I don't know how you could do it.
And look, if it's only a 2 or 3 paddocks that you have identified this year that is less than 10%, it's best to get that 10% right rather than doing too much and getting a higher rate of failure on that because of the issues because of the criteria not being met. So like whatever is right this year, do it as long as it's no more than 15%, and then get more paddocks ready next year then to oversow. And look, at part of this is going to be a reseeding protocol as well. So like we're saying up to 10% reseeding in a year and between 15 and 20% oversown in a year. So in any 1 year, all going well, you could have somewhere between 25 and 30% of your farm sown with clover. Now, not all of that will work, particularly on the oversowing point of sight, but having a clear plan in place over a multiple number of years.
And Jim, Michael has pointed to the fact that we can, do up to 25, 30% of the farm per year. Like, to you, what level of clover have you on the farm right now? And you mentioned the importance of the plan and making the decision to go and establish white clover. So what is the plan over the coming years for your farm?
Well, we started last year with 11 hectares of our 67 of a milking platform. But look, going back on it, we had clover on some paddocks that were sown 10, 15 years ago. And they've come back in, they've persisted away. And with the grazing management that we had, aggressive grazing in the springtime and a long season grazing, those have held over the years and have increased a lot in the last number of years. So I think we're up to 35%.
Yeah, I'm actually just looking at it here, Jim. So I on Jim's farm earlier on this week or late last week, one or the other, and it was 32% of Jim's farm currently has clover. Last year, he averaged on that 32%, he averaged 19% clover content. And in the spring to date, he has just shy of 15% to date. And that's just in March. So, which is a very good position to be in to be able to reduce fertiliser on some of those paddocks then from May onwards.
Yeah, so look at it, Emma-Louise, when you say, I hope that we can get clover in. If we can repeat what we had last year, again this year, and another 2 years after that, we'll be up to a very high percentage. But look, I just to go back on it, if you're waiting, if you're not grazing aggressively in the springtime, and I use that word aggressively, having your covers right, going out grazing, is clover going to work? Clover doesn't want big fields of grass around the farm. In April, it wants the place floored coming into April, I think. There might be a little bit of clover in where you have, and you might be able to increase that. But if you're not on a grazing plan in the first place for grass, it's just I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I find it very hard to know how clover is going to fit into a system that isn't being grazed aggressively in the first place.
And looking at that 32% of the farm, Jim, where you have a good level of white clover, are you doing anything differently in terms of your fertiliser application when you compare it to your swards that have just the perennial ryegrass only?
Yeah, we'll say our farm is kind of split in two with a road. So traditionally, all going back over the years, we always grazed strongly at the milking parlour side of the road of the farm, and we didn't cut them for silage, and we got our silage requirements elsewhere. So those ones, and look, we didn't want to be cutting bales. There were no great, while we use a little bit of them, there's no great requirement for a huge amount of bales around the place. So we were judicious over the years with fertiliser during the summer, and I think that has helped the clover get going on those paddocks over the years, and now it's there, and we really intend pushing this clover. From what I understand from Mike and all the other researchers, we have to make this clover work itself, and we're going to, we have a contractor that comes in for spreading the fertiliser with a GPS system, so we can cut that down precisely to exact, and so our plan is to cut the fertiliser, and let the clover do what it's meant to do.
And Mike, could you put some numbers on it, like where there is a good level 20-25% white clover in swards, like what is the fertiliser application for the year? Like what can you spread in order to grow a similar amount of grass than you would with your perennial ryegrass swards?
Yeah, so I think what Jim said there, it's important that, number one, you have to have the right level of clover in your swards, because if you go and reduce your fertilizer level with having very low levels of clover or none, you are going to run into issues with grass quality and reduce grass growth. So I think picking the paddocks again, once you have gone through the establishment phase, and look, Jim is in a lucky position, and some of the other farmers that we're working with as well, that they have a percentage of the farm that now has reasonable levels of clover that is going to allow them to reduce clover contents. And I think it's paddocks that hit that close to 15 to 20% in early April that you can now identify for reduced fertilizer rates on from May onwards. And all the work that we've done here with Deirdre Hennessy in Moore Park and Brian McCarthy in Clonakilty would show that we can get down to 9 and 10 kilos of nitrogen per month when we have that kind of 20-25% clover content in this ward. So it's not going with zero level of fertilizer, it is going with a little less than half per month than what we would typically have gone with. So if you're usually working at 0.8 or 1 unit of nitrogen per day per across the main season, we're bringing that back down to 0.4 and 0.5 unit a day.
And again, you both have emphasized the importance of soil fertility, establishing white clover. But Mike, talk through, I suppose, the requirements for P, K and lime, in that post-sow period. Is the requirement to spread compounds also, or are they sufficient in the soil?
The soil pH is critical for nodulation, and if we don't have the correct soil pH of a 6.3 to 6.5 and ideally 6.5, we're going to reduce the level of nodulation and rhizobial bacteria, which is the main mechanics for nitrogen fixation. So again, we must have that 6.5 and 6.3 to 6.5 soil pH at all times and maintaining it in those swards on it, and that's by maintaining it, topping it up. In terms of P is very important for establishment. So again, that's why having the correct soil fertility, and if an allowance available, sowing it with a P compound fertilizer at time of sowing, whether it's over-sowing or reseeding. And then K is long-term persistence in the sward, so it maintains stolon development and stolon production. Look, we're going to get a lot of this from using slurry, and particularly with low emission slurry spreading, we're going to get higher uptake of P and K from slurry on the milking platform. But there is requirements of maintaining that P and K levels in index 3s and 4s across the main grazing season, and that will involve spreading some level of compound, particularly in early part of the year, kind of March, April, May, early June period, so we can get that stolon development when we really need it, and nodulation for the second part of the year to increase nitrogen fixation. Clover fixes nitrogen relatively quick, or starts to develop root nodules, and that's relatively quick after it's sown, but it doesn't actually release that nitrogen into the soil for the companion grass species for between 8 and 12 months. So we don't get a whole lot of benefit of having the clover in the sward in terms of, for the companion grass species, in terms of nitrogen fixation. So we still need some level of nitrogen in the sward in the first year post sowing. So what we have said in our protocol with our farms and Jim and the rest of them as well is, once we over sow, we're reducing our level of nitrogen for 2 rotations, or for 2 months. That's probably 3 rotations. And and we're bringing it back down to 15 kilos per month. So we're going a half rate for those first 2 months post-sowing. So if you oversow on the 1st of April, you're going with a half rate of nitrogen for April and May and into early June. And then we're going back to normal levels of nitrogen fertilizer as you would do in a grass-only sward, because we still need to maintain high levels of grass production and herbage production. And once we come to the following spring then on those paddocks, once they have adequate levels of clover, then we can start to reduce levels of chemical fertilizer when they're 8 to 12 months established. And that's when they will start to release the nitrogen from the root nodules into the soil, so the companion grass species can then use it and take it up.
And Mike, people can see more at the over-sowing events that are taking place nationally in the coming weeks. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so look, as part of this on-farm study, we have a total of 35 farms last year. We're increasing that this year, hopefully, that we're establishing clover on these farms over a 4 to 5 year period from that blueprint that we're talking about, that kind of 15 to 25% per year. And as part of this program, we're organising a series of clover farm events starting in the 5th of April, running until the 19th of April, on 12 farms across the country to try and showcase best management practices on establishing grass clover swards and what these farms have actually done in the last 12 months, and what their plan is going forward then with more establishment. So the two walks that we're having, 2 walks a day, all walks are starting at 11 a.m. They're available on the Teagasc website and all social media. I think they're in the Journal and Independent and Agriland this week as well. But there are 2 walks starting on the 5th of April, and we have on Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday of next week, the 5th, 6th and 7th of April, and then the following Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, 12th, 13th and 14th of April, and there's one other walk then on the 19th of April in Sligo, and all details are available on it. And Jim, if anyone wants to come and see Jim's farm, it's on the 7th of April in County Tipperary, and the details, ear codes and all speakers of the events are on the website.
As you say, Mike, people can look to their, I suppose, regional and local farm on the Teagasc website. Thank you, Jim and Mike, for the great insight into your experiences of over-sowing white clover on your farm.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Jim.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.